We are creatures of desire. What we most desire is meaning. What makes us suffer most is a lack of meaning.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Marital therapist, author, and communications trainer Andrew G. Marshall invites guests from all walks of life to discuss what makes life meaningful.
Hello, I'm Andrew G. Marshall. Welcome to The Meaningful Life. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Podbeam, and wherever you find your podcasts. How do you get on with your in-laws? Perhaps you're really close and you all go on holiday together. It's good to have a built-in babysitter. Maybe you have a polite relationship and everybody keeps a safe distance. From my casebook, I know in-laws can be a source of rows between you and your partner, and how much their helpful comments can hurt. My witness today is Sue Atkins, who brings 35 years as a parenting coach to this topic. She used to be a deputy head teacher. You might know her as a parenting expert from ITV This Morning and Good Morning Britain and Disney Junior. She's brought up 2 children of her own. So, Sue, I'm going to put you straight on the spot. What kind of in-law do you think you are for your children's partners?
Good Lord. Well, my children are not married yet, but they live with their partners. And that's a really interesting question. I have a big personality. I'm very confident. And I hope I won't or don't overwhelm my children's partners. My kids know me. In fact, my kids are quite similar to me in many ways. They're full of, enthusiasm. They're a bit like Labrador puppies. And I love that in them. And it's interesting because you tend to choose a partner, I feel, that is not like you, is complementary to you, but not the same as you. And I've noticed indeed, my husband is placid, long-suffering, I guess, but very good in a crisis, very calm, very competent. And in fact, my daughter's boyfriend is just like that too. I see that trait, all those traits in him, which is really interesting. And she often says, Sam is rather like Dad. So that's a good thing. Sophie's fairly new to the mix, so I don't quite know what she makes of me yet. I think I probably frighten the life out of her. And I dare say if they have children, they'll go, oh no, here comes the parenting expert. But I won't do that. I am so mindful, Andrew, of not overwhelming. And when I work with clients as well, if a client is shy, and I work with a lot of parents going through divorce, if they're going through a difficult time, I adapt my behavior. I'm an NLP Master Practitioner and Trainer. So it would be foolish of me and unkind of me, really, to overwhelm someone who is feeling nervous, unsure, worried. So I go in and out of that, and I make sure they feel comfortable. That's the important thing for me.
Do you know the old saying, the cobbler's children are the worst shod?
No, I don't. But I do know that I've got friends whose husbands fit kitchens and their kitchens are a disastrous mess because they always were out working and not fixing their own kitchens.
Because that's the problem. If you are a parenting coach and you do it all day, yes. I mean, you don't really want to roll up your sleeves when you get back, but you do have to. So we've looked at your relationship with the next generation down. Obviously, you have in-laws too. How did you get on, or how do you get on with your in-laws?
I got on absolutely fantastically with both my in-laws. In fact, Judy, who's passed away now, she suffers from dementia for 10 years, and her husband, who's 95 now, my father-in-law, going through chemotherapy actually, but he looked after her for 10 years. So we're making sure we take care of him. But when the children were young, it was absolutely fantastic because they lived about 80 miles away from us and still do. And they used to come down every other week, really, because I didn't want to bring the children. When you've got small children, you have to sort of move house every time you go and stay somewhere. So they would come down to us. They were very actively involved in helping with the kids. And we went on holiday with my mum and dad and Kevin's mum and dad quite a few times. We had separate apartments because I think you do need to, have your own space. But honestly, it was such a joy. And I knew it was unusual. And I was always so grateful about it. So they helped raise the children too, because grandparents bring in such a different dimension to raising children too. So I was rather blessed, to be honest.
But I can't believe that it always went perfectly, that they never overstepped your rules, for example.
No, of course. Well, in that sense, grandparents are there and they can do the extras, can't they? They've got all the patience. They've got far more time because they're not working perhaps full time like they used to. And I do remember and I do recall Molly was coming up to the age when she wanted trendy trainers and things like that. And my father-in-law and mother-in-law weren't wealthy or anything. And you know how expensive these trainers can be. And part of the values that I wanted to pass on to my children is that you don't always get what you want. So, when we were out and about, sometimes I'd just say, oh, no, you can't have that, just to practice the word no. So you don't always get what you want, even though it was only, a penny farthing at the checkout or something for some sweets. But sometimes saying no to children is good for them. But I thought, God, what am I going to do? Because she put on her Christmas list, I think it was, she wanted these trainers and they were specific, what kids are like in their teenage years. And I just thought they're far too expensive. And I don't want the father-in-law and mother-in-law to feel obliged and have to. So I remember they came down one weekend and we were having a cup of coffee and informal chat. And I'd sort of planned in my head a little bit how I would approach it. I do think that's important because if you get cross or you're annoyed or you're patronising, that just sets up walls between you, not bridges. And I didn't want to offend, but I also wanted to use it as an opportunity to get them out of jail in terms of buying these expensive trainers, and also to make sure that, my daughter didn't get everything that she wanted. So anyway, I had that conversation over a cup of coffee, and she sort of went, not obviously, but I could see that they were kind of relieved because they were really expensive. So we got round that one, and then we had a good old chat about all sorts of things around the kids. And grandparents want to spoil their children, but I've also written an article just recently actually about smartphones and grandparents, because they will indulge them on smartphones and tablets and devices because they love them and they don't always understand the technology. But for me, that's not a good thing. So it's a latest blog actually around how to handle when you have that conversation about when the grandparents look after the children and they're probably giving them in a bit too much to the technology.
So you and your partner have agreed a rule. There's a certain number of FaceTime on tablets.
Yes.
They go off to their grandparents for the weekend. Do you say, it's my rules in your house, or do they have their rules in their house?
I'm not autocratic about all that sort of thing, but it's worth having, again, like I did with the trainers, having that sort of conversation. And in fact, in the blog, I write the sort of things that you can say and how you can say them and when is it a good time to say them, because your body language gives it away, your tone of voice, and you're grateful that they love your children so much. They want to spend time with them. And, kids are always whining to be on their devices, even if it isn't raining. They don't necessarily want to bake or do a board game. But once they get into the habit and you're kind of clear in what your rules are around that, then the children will enjoy being with grandparents, doing other things, art and craft, or just going for a walk in the fields across nature. Keep it very simple. But I do think it's important, particularly if grandparents are taking care of the child when you are at work, that you have that conversation so the rules are kind of clean. So I was reading this article about smartphones, damaging children's sort of development, their social skills. They don't sleep so well. And I was looking at my, smartphone use, and I was thinking perhaps that we could do this instead with Johnny, So that brings them in rather than telling them. You're kind of sharing with them your new approach or your change of approach, and just get them mindful, because you don't want them on some of their devices for hours on end.
So, do you actually ask them, what is your opinion?
Yes, I think so. You'd say, well, what do you think? It's all about the language, isn't it? It's not, what's your opinion? It's kind of, so what do you think? Should we work together on this? And that brings them in. We're in it together. We are the we family team, like we were the Atkins family team. And this is sort of how we're going to do it. You can't keep at it and micromanage it and make them feel bad if you notice when the child comes home, on a Saturday night or Sunday morning or something, they've been on it a while. Perhaps it was a really exciting thing they were watching together. So be mindful of that and be gracious, but also don't be frightened of having that conversation.
When I was small, my grandmother liked to give us sweets.
Yes.
She And my mother always used to say to us, if you keep on eating those sweets, when you have children, I will spoil them so much that they're sick and you have to clean up the mess. Which I think was a rather aggressive thing to say.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you ban anything, that's why I'm not a fan of banning smartphones or banning anything. As soon as I go on a diet, what do I want? I want cake because it's banned. So balance in everything. And yes, be forgiving sometimes. Grandparents can spoil the kids with stuff, but they also spoil them with time, and they also spoil them with wisdom. And, it's a wonderful thing to have a grandparent in a child's life, hopefully for a positive effect. So yes, be mindful of how you do it, and then you'll be okay.
So I'm going to take you through a few scenarios which cause problems between partners, and I'd like you to get some sort of insight from you. So how you deal with a crying child, it's a very personal thing about how you actually deal with them. Generally, our generation are a much more sort of, there's not a problem with crying. Whereas the generations beforehand, big boys don't cry, and they can actually be sort of a little bit sort of no nonsense sometimes. So if you disagree with the way that they're dealing with a child when it's crying, how do you negotiate with something like that?
Well, again, it's back to your tone of voice, preparing how you're going to mention it, when you're going to mention it, how and where you're going to be sitting and what you're going to be doing so you won't get interrupted or they won't take offence, because it may be different. The parenting styles are slightly different these days. I have to say, I think a lot of parents want to be their child's friend, not their parent, whereas in the past generations, it was do as I say or else. So there's a balance in between those two extremes somewhere where you are the parent and you do guide, perhaps the grandparents around your values or your ways of doing things. And I think it's important that, children mustn't be allowed to cry out, and this idea of be big and strong and, you're a boy, get up, you're okay. We know that's not it. I mean, there's so much more, you've got all sorts of footballers, Prince William talking around mental health and well-being, and in particular for boys to express their emotions. It's healthy. It's how we survive and how we thrive. So, making sure certainly a baby never is left to cry out or any of that. I don't agree with any of it. You can never spoil a baby. And with a small child or a child of any age, listening to them helps them feel heard. So if they're crying, find out what it is about. It's not attention seeking all the time. Perhaps they've fallen off their skateboard and they need to sort of have a bit of a cry, and you need to sort of be there to reassure them, and it's okay, because risk taking is how children learn. And that's why I want kids off smartphones, really, because everything's so passive. You need to get back out in the real world and scrape your knee and climb a tree. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
So what's the difference between being a friend and a parent?
Well, a lot of parents I work with don't like saying no to their children. That's why I suggest saying no to the small stuff like the sweets at the checkout in Tesco's. Practice that, saying no, because children don't like, being told, no, you can't do that. But then sometimes if you tell them why you don't want them doing this and don't doing that, for example, holding their hand if they're young toddlers in a busy road area, they'll wriggle and won't want to hold your hand. And you have to stop, go down to their eye level, look them in the eye and say, you have to hold my hand. It's a dangerous road. Cars can knock you over, hurt you and possibly kill you. So you use the language appropriate to the child, but you must step up and be the parent. You just don't go, oh, well, he doesn't want to hold my hand. Oh, he doesn't want to eat his broccoli. Oh, she doesn't want to do her homework.
But when they're teenagers, it's far more difficult, because you're not talking about holding my hand. You're saying it's not a good idea to go to that party. That's an entirely different type of conversation.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. And, I did actually say once to my daughter, are you really going out in that skirt? And I thought, oh, keeping it real here in the family household.
Did you recognise your own mother's voice at that moment?
Oh, I do remember once, yes, when I said to Molly, yeah, I heard my mum, and I thought, oh, and I thought, okay, lesson learned, because that's the only thing we can all do is observe and notice and improve. Nobody gets it right. No one's perfect. It's a messy world. And, yes, I read and write and do all sorts of parenting, but, we all make mistakes about it. We'll learn on the job, don't we? There is no handbook particularly. Well, I did try and write one, but anyway. No, it's important with teenagers that you don't come authoritarian. If you come down because I said so, they're going to rebel against that, because it's all about independence. In fact, there's very little difference between a toddler and a teenager in the sense of striving for independence. So that toddler having a tantrum because he's trying to put on his seatbelt himself and he can't do it, he goes into a meltdown, or the teenager who's got the strop with you about, you've said something or done something. So it's all about connection. It's all about conversations. It's all about you being the grown-up, being adaptable, being flexible, because I had a client fairly recently and the 14-year-old was really kicking off at times because the mother was speaking to him as if he was still 4 years old at the table. He had to ask to sort of almost get down or leave the table at 14. Well, maybe at 4, you want him to say, is it all right if I get down now and go and play, or whatever it is? But certainly at 14, you've got to change your style. So authoritarian, where you're the boss, isn't very good, but authoritative, where you're in authority, but you're flexible and it changes as your children mature and as you know your own child's personality. But conversations are the way forward to build those bridges, not those walls between you.
And I think what often happens is you tend to have these difficult conversations when you're under stress.
Yes.
And that's possibly the worst time to have them.
I think you're absolutely right. I have a technique where I tell parents I work with to imagine you've got a remote control in your hand, like on the TV. You press the pause button, you take a physical step back, just one, take a breath, and then you look at the situation like, is what I'm going to say now going to be helpful or damage the relationship long term? Am I going to be angry? I know all these emotions, you think, oh God, I haven't got time for all that. But the pressing of the pause button in your imagination, the stepping back and the breath just gives you that split second to decide how you're going to handle it. And that can make an enormous difference, that very simple technique.
Yeah, I call it the golden gap.
Love that.
Between our automatic reaction, because once the train has left the station, you've gone into your usual coping mechanism, which is, mine is to shut down, but, other people, just let rip.
Yes.
Once you've actually started, once the train is going out of the station, it's not coming back again.
Yes.
Whereas with the golden gap, as you say, if you could take a physical step back, a deep breath, what is the feeling? Oh, it's anger. I have a feeling this isn't going to go well.
Yeah.
Breath out, and then you can decide, what am I going to do? I mean, it probably takes 2 seconds.
Yes. It sounds like it's a long thing, but actually that split second or those 2 seconds really are fantastic. I love that. The golden gap. Really good.
So what if you've got rude or unfriendly in-laws?
Well, you see, the thing is, you can't change other people. You can only change yourself. And I wrote an article about Christmas and around the in-laws coming for Christmas. And this person was dreading the mother-in-law coming because nothing she could do was ever right with the kids. Nothing we don't do it like that. You want to do it like this. And, in my day, we cook gravy like this. Oh, my goodness. And so I thought, I got her into a state of whether it goes pear-shaped or perfect. She was grounded. She was centered. She looked at it and rehearsed it in her imagination too. I got her to do some NLP visualizing, imagining it going very well and how she was, imagining it not going quite so well, and noticing what she was going to say at times. Because pressing that pause button, taking that step back, just allowing sometimes that space, gave the situation a bit of breathing space. And, the idea being what is underneath, you can go into the psychology, what's underneath the mother-in-law's reaction, etc. But sometimes just sort of holding the space so she has said what she has said. When I'm on the radio sometimes or TV talking about smacking, which always gets people really fired up, And they always bring me on as the voice of, well, I hope, reason, which is balance. I've tried to be balanced. My father taught me balance in everything. So anyway, I try to be balanced, but they'll always bring on an extreme person. And one time only, they brought on this person that I got myself so wound up by what they were saying about smacking never did them any harm, blah, blah, blah. And I found myself getting drawn in, because that's what the TV and the radio like. They want you to be all angry and controversial. And I didn't like that, because they had control over the situation. So from then on in, I've got all my facts and figures and all the rest of it, but I take a breath and I get grounded. I get centered. I imagine my feet have got the roots of a tree coming down into the earth, like an oak tree, wise and really grounded. And then I just, my mum used to wind me up actually at Christmas and things like that too. And I had to learn strategies, I suppose, just on the hoof initially, before I started writing about it, to handle her, because she would be awkward. And then after you've done a bit of that, then you can feel prepared for when they come, because you can't change that person. They're going to be maybe curmudgeonly or judgmental or critical or whatever it is, but you can think about your response. And so instead of reacting, I talk about responding to that, and then you're more mindful.
So what's the difference between reacting and responding?
Well, reacting is something happens, you say something or you do something. You just react to the moment, like, oh my God, that went off. Oh, responding is, she said that, or, they've done that. How do I want to respond to that? Reaction is without thinking in my head, and responding is with a bit of thought.
Because if you've got oversensitive and dramatic in-laws, I'm not quite certain what you actually do, because they're, sounding off. How are you actually going to deal with that, both in the moment and trying to have a conversation later about it?
Well, I think you have to then manage the time spent with them, because with all the will in the world, if you don't get on and they wind you up and they're unhelpful and it's stressful and nobody enjoys it, it's a bit like a friend actually, isn't it? Sometimes you have to then think, well, I won't meet them quite so often. We won't be in situations where we are just all together, go out to a restaurant sometimes, because that breaks the pattern of sort of always being very intensely at home or around the table. I often find if you bring over a friend or something, that can, dissipate the intense conversations too. So look at strategies, think what might work for your family, and then perhaps if they really are that difficult, try and limit how often you see them, and also get prepared for that. I don't mean kind of ready for battle, but sometimes when I even work with clients going into the divorce courts, I say, what is your favourite colour that makes you feel empowered and confident? So wear a scarf or something with that colour, because it reminds you of that you are wonderful and confident and amazing and doing your best, and this is how you want to do it. So that it just grounds you and helps you deal with whatever you kind of find yourself in.
So this is a problem that I see quite a lot, where somebody feels that their partner is a great son or daughter, but not so good a partner when the in-laws are there. So either they regress or, let's say mother-in-law is really demanding and things have got to be done her way. And your husband says, let her get on with it. But actually, you don't want your children treated like that, and you don't want to become sort of, disempowered, and you don't want your partner being, let's be honest, closer to his mother than to you.
I agree. It's a difficult one, that one. But you see, that's the other side of it. I wouldn't do it there and then. I would pause to ponder again. And when all of the mother-in-law and all of them have gone home, choose what you want to say, maybe get a piece of paper, write it out, vent it if you want, get really angry. I get so angry, I can't bear it. But don't send that anywhere and don't show that to anyone. Perhaps bin that or burn it or something. But it's out of your system, which is very important, because I feel you hold stuff in your body, your tension and your anger. So get it out. So actually even that helps you breathe a bit and feel a bit more released. And then, with a cup of coffee, get a piece of paper again and jot down perhaps some of the things you might like to say in a more reasoned way to your partner. This is not to the parent or the parent of the parent. This is to your partner, because actually this is about communication, and it can put up a block. I mean, I'm always talking about building a a wall. It won't be building a bridge of, goodwill between you and your partner. And you've got to be careful, because over the years, those small things can build up and build up. Then there's another thing you've discovered. Then you'll think of that. Then you start focusing and noticing more and more of those difficult moments. And that can build a real problem between your relationship. But of course, like everything, you have to be careful how you say these things and when. So choose your moment. You'll have rehearsed in your head what's on your piece of paper and how you want to say it. So it doesn't sound judgmental. It doesn't sound as if you're having a go and picking on them. But say, look, can I chat with you? I'm worried. I'm upset. I'm concerned. I've noticed. And always use the I statements. I've noticed, I feel, I think, not sure if you're aware of that, but what can we do about it? Because actually it really is bothering me. And again, it's back to tone of voice and body language. It's all about trying to communicate your strong feelings that you really feel you want to discuss, because perhaps he hasn't noticed, or perhaps he does just think, oh, my mother was rather domineering in childhood, and she's still rather domineering, and I'd rather not confront her. And then they may say, oh, because she's getting on a bit now and we don't want to upset the last few years. But that's still not quite right. So think of it in terms of, we are part of a team. You and me are the team raising the kids. So let's try and do it together. And, if you feel heard and understood, hopefully your partner, you hope, will actually go, well, I hadn't thought of it like that.
Because I would say make certain you don't use the word always, because there will not be it's not always, and must and should and never, because immediately you start into a discussion of, yes, there was one time back in 1973 they didn't do it.
That's right. I love that, Andrew. That's such great advice. Those words are laden, aren't they?
And I have to say that my mother-in-law was a very strong personality, and she lived in Mexico. So whenever she came, it was for weeks and weeks on end.
Right. Oh, my goodness. Yes.
And my golden piece of advice is, your partner can criticize his or her mother, but those critical words, even if they're critical words that your partner has used in the past, may never cross your lips.
Yes.
Because if you give it enough space, often they will find they're upset with their parent. But if you come to it first, then immediately it becomes a form of crisis between the two of you.
I think that's really good advice, isn't it? Yes, I think you've got to be very careful with it. But it's important, though, that you do raise it if it's bothering you. As I say, I think it's important, but how you do it's very important too.
Yeah, but you can raise it without actually criticising the other person.
Good point. Yeah, agreed.
I mean, it's a difficult one, but you can say, I'm upset about this, but I don't think you say, they're an interfering busybody.
No, that's it. It's all about the language you choose to use.
But that might be what you're thinking at that moment.
No, you're right. And I think your approach is wonderful too. And it's just that gentle thinking about it and how you say it and where you say it. It's very good advice.
Now, let's look at it from the other perspective. Perhaps your partner is jealous of the time you need and you want to give to one of your parents. Perhaps, for example, you were brought up by a single mother. She has not so much support, and you need to go round there quite a lot, but your partner can become really quite jealous of the amount of time you take. How do you deal with that?
Well, again, it's all about communication, isn't it? All the things we're discussing actually come boiling down to how you say it, what you say, and when you choose to say it. Because you often notice, actually, when babies come along, that partners feel a bit left out too. And there's all that going on with clients that I work with, But this is important, and it is about the messaging that you want to say. And strike when the iron is cold, not when the heat of the moment, when you're angry about their reaction to you going off again, because your mother's done something with the fridge that she can't sort out or something. So it is about saying, look, mum's in this moment. These are short years we have. I want to spend time helping. How can we work together so it feels more balanced if they are feeling a little bit out of sync, so that you then make time for each other. I talk about a lot of spinning plates. It's like in the circus. When I went to Billy Smart's circus on Clapham Common when I was a kid
I
with my mum
remember
and
Billy
dad.
Smart.
I remember that, yeah. That's how old we are. The plates were spinning, and the clown would go over here and spin one, then he'd run over here and try and spin the other one. So you're spinning a lot of plates, and certainly if you've got an elderly parent, you are spinning a lot. And it's very stressful. I remember it with my own parents. I'm an only child, and so I had to spin all the plates. I felt quite a lot on my own as they got poorly and ill, both of them. But it's then about saying, look, what can we do together? And then you make some time for your partner. When I talk about all sorts of things with families, I talk about me time, which is important, getting your own time, getting our time, which is the partner and you doing things together, even if it's just to walk up to the pub for a pint with the dogs, without the kids and without all the responsibilities. And then there is, we time, where you come together as a family with the children or whoever you want. So those plates are spinning, and sometimes, they spin a bit and they sort of going to fall over and they're going to fall off. So make sure when you're spinning them, you are trying to manage it all. But certainly if your partner's feeling a bit left out of that or a bit sidelined or something, then just look to fill that gap and talk with them and say, look, I've noticed and I know I'm really busy. So shall we go for a walk and shall we have a pint at the pub? Something like that, whatever it is that suits you.
I think it's really interesting talking about the difference between our time, which is you and your partner, and we time, which is the whole of the family. Because I think that what can often happen is we think of we time, doing everything as a family, as our time as well.
Yes.
And that can be a big mistake because you become co-parents rather than partners.
Yes, exactly. And that's where not many people have thought of it in those terms with those three spinning plates. And often just even thinking about it makes you think, oh yeah, I'll change my perspective on that.
So when you've got a difference, either in-laws, parenting or whatever, it's very easy to get into the position of defending your position. My tip is not to defend your position, but get your partner to explain theirs.
Nice.
What do you think of that? And
I love that, Andrew. I really think that's a very, very helpful mindset.
Because if they've had a chance to explain theirs, they're much more open to you explaining yours.
Yes. Yeah, and let them go first. That shows that you are, big enough to listen and big enough to take it, whatever they want to say. And very much so in this day and age, we're not very good. It's all very divisive, the world. So the idea of holding space to be more collaborative and inclusive, even in families and relationships, is a really good one. And I like that technique very much.
And my second one is to go deeper if you're actually stuck. Look at what you're bringing from your family and maybe even go back 2 generations. So let's say it's money that is the topic that is dividing you. Talk about the emotional financial inheritance and hear about your partner's different emotional inheritance when it comes to money. Because once you can understand what's the unseen issues you're sitting on, it sort of makes it a little less personal, a little less sticky.
I agree. I mean, that's actually what I describe because I study Alfred Adler, but I would say that's intergenerational patterns. And that can come down through trauma, money, values, all sorts of things that you bring along with you that can trigger you sometimes, can't they?
So do you think that, I'm guessing you're in the 60-something generation too.
Yes.
There's the sort of, let's say, the 40-something generation, and then there's the 20-something generation. Do you think that the generations are getting on better with their in-laws, or is it getting worse?
Gosh, what an interesting question. How would you assess that? I suppose you didn't talk about your feelings, talk about your parenting. In my mother's generation, my mother was the oldest of 7 in Ireland. And I don't think my grandma and my granddad talked about their styles of parenting back in the day. They're too busy trying to put bread on the table, literally. So now we do have perhaps better relationships, but sometimes we're still scared of talking about our feelings about that with mother-in-law or father-in-law, I think. But I think talking like this, empowering parents to perhaps raise certain things, but the way we do it is very important because I think there is more collaborative parenting in terms of childcare in the UK in particular. It's so expensive that grandparents and father-in-law and mother-in-law play a huge role. sometimes in raising the children because they're looking after them a lot after school and things like that. So, and during the summer holidays. So it's hard. I don't know statistically about that, but my general vibe is that, yeah, we're getting along, we're talking about it more, and families are learning to communicate more effectively.
Because one of the issues that I sort of wonder about is I think maybe not our generation, but the 40-something generation has much higher expectations of how things are supposed to go than maybe our generation did.
That's interesting, isn't it? I don't know. What makes you think that then with your clients?
Yeah, for example, that your in-laws are going to be a resource rather than something you endure. People are going to get on. We are going to be able to talk it and hug it out sort of kind of thing.
Yeah. And that can only be good for the kids. So at the end of the day, all of that is only good for the whole family, really. Communication and, getting on the same page and respecting, this idea of respecting differences respectfully kind of thing, I think is really important. We know grandparents back in the day would put, I don't know, the dummy in sugar or give them whiskey or something to make them sleep. We know we don't do that anymore. And sugar and, carbohydrates and junk food and all that, we know better now. And so if we work together as a whole family team, I'm sure we can, raise happy, confident children together.
So the famous old statement is the only person you can change is yourself. How does this apply to dealing with your in-laws?
I think it's also, you get what you focus on, don't you, Andrew? So I'm a great believer in gratitude, and I keep a gratitude journal, and it becomes a way of life to me too. And people go, oh, that's Pollyanna, happy, clappy, but it's not really. And I wrote in my Can Do Kids journal, Confidence for Kids, the idea of gratitude. And I link it to brushing their teeth in the evening. In the morning, I get them brushing their teeth, setting themselves up, looking in the mirror, saying, I am special because, and all the good things that they're good at. And in the evening, looking at what they're grateful for. Now, you start off when you do that, you're just grateful for the obvious stuff. And then the more you do it, you get very grateful and you get into a mindset of gratitude. So, it's very simple, like a lovely walk in the garden, you can listen to the birds, or you can see the daffodils growing. And all of these attitudes build a sense of positivity and gratitude. So I think that's a very good mindset to adopt.
So I'm grateful for the fact that my mother-in-law collected the children from school.
Yes.
Rather than, and she gave them a bag of chips on the way back.
Yeah, no, exactly that. I'm really grateful that she gets on so well with the children. I'm really grateful that she loves the children. She nurtures the children. I noticed with my mum at 72, when I had my kids small, they were small and she was looking after them, she used to walk them down the road to the park, and Willard would get a bit tired. He'd hop onto the pushchair. Molly was in the pushchair. And there she was, happily pushing them down the road. And I thought, I'm so grateful for the time that she spends with them and what she says to them. And sometimes, she'd say things I didn't necessarily agree with or something. But once you focus on what you're pleased with or positive about or grateful for, you can then, it puts it sort of back into perspective. Like you say, she bought chips and gave them too many sweets and they were on the device for an hour and a half. But actually, what's happening here is they're being loved and nurtured and cared for.
Because grandparents are incredibly important. I'm actually sort of feeling quite emotional when I'm thinking about my grandparents. I don't know about you.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, there's a photograph I took when I was only about 7 of my granddad in my garden in Streatham, and I'm a visual person. As you can see, I'm looking up here. I can see the picture of my granddad in his suit, because that was the generation, in the sunshine, and that was the last photograph that was taken of my granddad before he died. And I still got that up in my room, actually, because grandparents are just wonderful. And he used to take me up to Streatham Common, and I used to climb trees and hang off, do swinging from them and all sorts that my mum and dad probably wouldn't let me. And we had such special time. And I remember apparently my mum said, when I went to school, Granddad says, now what am I going to do that Sue's gone to school? So happy memories of grandparents, really wonderful. And if you're blessed to have a grandparent and you do get along with them, I watched a program last night called The Piano, and there was a young girl playing the piano there in Victoria Station, and her grandmother was watching, because her grandmother was the one that encouraged her to play the piano and thought she had potential, etc. She wasn't looking to be famous, but the grandmother was so struck by that, the grandmother's influence in encouraging her grandchild. led to all sorts of confidence in the young person. So it was really lovely to see.
So we're going to do a letter in a moment, but that's happening after this.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material and other benefits.
If you'd like to participate in the programme and send us a letter, it's very simple. You go to my website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcasts. You can find out how to send a letter in and also become a supporter of The Meaningful Life, get the bonus material and help me produce all of these wonderful interviews. So this is the letter I've chosen to talk to Sue about. My husband and I are in our mid-30s and we're thinking about having a family together. We both have demanding jobs and therefore I want to be certain that we're going to be in this 50-50, sharing things right down the middle. However, my girlfriends laugh when I tell them this and say that I will inevitably end up doing more than my half. When the school or the nursery calls and says your child is ill, who has to drop everything and collect? My mother says she will help, but I don't want to rely on her. And if I'm being honest, I don't trust my husband to go through with his side of the deal. He thinks I'm being overly negative and we'll sort something out. My mother says, you can't know what it's going to be like until you're there, when it's too late. What do you think? I'm going round in circles.
Oh my goodness me, what an interesting question. I remember when I was pregnant, writing my pregnancy plan, for the hospital to have my babies. And of course, as soon as you get in there, nature just goes, and none of it happened. But you can have a bit of a plan, but life happens, doesn't it? I would say that would need a conversation and probably an ongoing one, not a nagging one, probably a lifelong one. As the children come along, as circumstances change, as people step up, as people fall off the steps of what they say they're going to do. It's about communication again. Back I come to that. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, there was some research done that mothers did pick up the slack to bringing up the children, cooking, cleaning, and working. We still have a long way to go on that equality business, but I think it's changing a little. There's all sorts of campaigns I notice on LinkedIn sometimes about these sorts of things. But if you can have a good conversation, perhaps over a glass of wine or something, or a cup of coffee, talking about your hopes, your aspirations, your dreams, your values around parenting, finding out where you sit in terms of, are you autocratic? Are you authoritarian? Are you flexible? Are you permissive? What style does your partner have? And what do you have? And then talk about those moments of, if I'm working and I've got an important meeting in Manchester, and Johnny gets poorly, who's going to pick him up from nursery or from school? Because I can't come from Manchester. So you need to have that sort of preparation. And it doesn't have to be even that dramatic. You might just be working from home. But if you don't have that conversation and you go, well, look, I'll get him, and it's this. The important thing is that men feel that in the office, they can say, I'm going to leave early because I've got to take Sophie to the dentist. It's just as important that dads take their kids to the dentist, to the doctor, that kids see their dads ironing. Certainly when I work with divorced couples, I often say to the divorced parent, the dad in particular, don't be the Disneyland dad. Don't always take them to wonderful places and, they climb Kilimanjaro and eat loads of junk food. Actually, let them see you ironing and laying the table and emptying the dishwasher. So you need to have those sorts of conversations that we are in together. We are a team. And then it will you can't control everything. You can't micromanage it now. You haven't even had them. But have a little bit of a general direction of how you share out things and what you both feel around these things. And then, it's an ongoing conversation. It's a bit like when parents say, oh, I've got to talk to the kids about, the birds and the bees. Well, it's not just one big conversation. it happens over a number of years and maturity. So the same thing happens with children. When you have a second child or a third child, things change again, or you might have a special needs child. So don't try and micromanage it too much, but do have a bit of a conversation to start it off so that you feel that it is more equal and you're not just expected to do absolutely everything.
I mean, the bit that sort of rather rings my alarm bells is I'm not certain if I trust my husband to go through with his half of the deal.
Yes, I heard that. Yes. So what's that about? That, that's for them to unpick already. Does he go back on his word on other things, or does he start off, meaning well and then forgets or goes back to, like we all do, your default position? So it is worth having that conversation and chatting and thinking about it a bit.
And the problem with parenting is it sort of brings the really deep down stuff up. So your existing fault line. So we've got, he thinks I'm being negative. Probably she thinks he's being too optimistic. And that sort of,
Yes.
pessimist, optimist, or somebody might, instead of saying pessimist, might say realist. That's an ongoing fight for a lot of couples.
I think an interesting one to think about, even at the beginning then, is, and have that conversation, when you've got the baby, let's face it, it can take a long time to have a child, but look at the feeding business. If you're breastfeeding, that means you're up in the night, you're doing it all. So think about the practicalities of having the baby beside you for 6 months or something in your bedroom, so it's easy for you to breastfeed because your partner can't get involved with that, and you don't necessarily want them woken up in the night just to be company and just to do their half share of supporting you. If you're bottle feeding, then that's a good way also, as the child learns then, that you take turns on some of that. Your partner could get up in the night and do the bottle at 2 or 3 in the morning for that one. So, and wants to support you, because the biggest thing here with babies is tiredness and exhaustion. And that's when tempers fray. That's when, people say things they shouldn't say. Also about nappies and things, we have come a long way from my grandfather not probably changing a nappy with all those 7 children. We have got to the point where dads get really involved, and in fact, there's always campaigns around public toilets and things in Marks and Spencer's that it now sort of says, nappy changing area, so dads can go in and change nappies. So those sort of very practical things, looking at the feeding, looking at the nappies, looking at perhaps as they get older, the cooking and sharing and eating together and all of that. Yes, it needs conversations and it needs them constantly, but it doesn't need judgmental. And if you have that attitude, you think he's going to renegade on that already, you come with an agenda and he will sense that.
Wise words. Now, we've almost finished the main part of the podcast, so I have to ask you, as a witness on the meaningful life, what makes your life meaningful?
Oh, relationships, my family, my kids, very much my partner, my dogs, my friends, my house, the joy I get from gardening and being creative. Writing, I've noticed. I mean, I just love to write. So I've written a number of books, but I write on Substack now. I've written for years on my own blog as articles. I write around the world and all sorts of things. I'm now creating a podcast, Navigating the Digital Jungle, anything creative. And I learned during the pandemic, actually, I can't actually paint, and you couldn't go to classes to learn, etc. Not that I'm particularly interested in that. I took up painting by numbers, which is so relaxing. Stick on a podcast, go in the garden, actually, now the weather's nice, and paint. So anything, I sing, I love singing. I don't do that professionally. I just love to sing in the car on SingStar or whatever it is with my kids when they come home for Mother's Day. I've noticed that creativity really feeds my spirit and my soul.
So we're going to be talking about support your child through change and the C's of resilience in the bonus material. And if you'd like to hear that, you can subscribe directly via Apple or Spotify. And if you want to become a supporter of The Meaningful Life and unlock the bonus material this way, here are the details.
You've been listening to The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. You can follow Andrew on Twitter, like him on Facebook, and please leave a review wherever you consume your podcasts. Making, editing, and distributing The Meaningful Life comes with substantial costs, and we'd like to ask for your help. Visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material for every program, send in a letter to be discussed by Andrew and his guests, and join a community of other people seeking to make their life meaningful. At the gold level, you get even more benefits. Production of The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall is by Michael Dooney. Social media by Madeleine Healy. Sound engineering and theme tune by Sebastian de la Luz Mendoza. And I'm Susie Colick. Please tell your friends and spread the word. Thank you.